Well, opposition MPs are pushing for more committee hearings into the allegations of sexual misconduct against former Chief of Defence Staff General Jonathan Vance. The demand comes after the latest testimony suggested the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, was aware of the allegations against Vance. That testimony came from Elder Marquez, a former senior advisor to the Prime Minister. He testified he was told by Telford or her assistant to contact the Minister of Defence in March of 2018 about an allegation against Vance. That would appear to contradict the version of events from the Minister of Defence, who told the committee it was his office that reached out to the Privy Council about the allegation, not the other way around. Let's bring in three members of Parliament now to discuss all of this. Anita Vandenbeld is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Defence. James Bezan is the Defence Critic for the official opposition Conservatives. And Lindsay Mathyssen is the Deputy Whip for the NDP and is a member of the Committee on the Status of Women, which has also been looking into the allegations against General Vance. Anita Vandenbeld, let me start with you. The Prime Minister has said he didn't know about the allegation against General Vance until he heard it in the media. But the latest testimony suggests his Chief of Staff, Katie Telford, was one of the first to hear about it in 2018. Is it reasonable to assume that if his Chief of Staff was aware, the Prime Minister must have been aware as well?
I think that what we've seen is that, and even the clerk of the Privy Council has said that, is that what you had at that time is it was not actionable, and they had reached an impasse. So at that point, there was nothing to actually tell. I think what you're seeing in committee is we have heard from the acting Chief of Defence Staff, the clerk of the Privy Council, the Secretary to the Cabinet, 6 hours with the Minister, and all of it is pointing in the exact same direction, is that the proper processes were followed. It went to the Privy Council, and that in fact everybody. It was Mr. Warnick himself that said everybody.
But are you saying that Katie Telford may have known? It may have been brought to her attention, but she didn't think there was enough there to tell the Prime Minister?
I think that's exactly what Mr. Marquez said, and that's exactly what Mr. Warnick said. It went to the highest public servant in the land. It went to Mr. Warnick, the clerk of the Privy Council, who said that at that point there was an impasse because they did not get a copy of the person who wanted to come forward.
Mr. Bezan, why do you want to question Katie Telford, and what do you want to ask her?
Well, I think it's got to the point now that it's not at all believable that Prime Minister Trudeau didn't know about the sexual misconduct allegations against General Vance. We know from committee work and that Katie Telford was immediately notified by Zita Estravis, the Chief of Staff, to Minister Harjit-Sajjan. And that she took that information and then had Elder Marquez contact PCO and go back to Zita Estravis.
But do you think it's impossible to think that they went down the road a little bit, found that they couldn't substantiate the allegation for the reasons they've all talked about, that the Prime Minister would not have been informed at that point because they had nothing to tell him?
As Mr. Warnick said in his testimony, that he's very disappointed that they lost sight of these allegations against General Vance. And that's because this government, even though they talk about being a feminist organization, they actually have done nothing and are a bunch of phony feminists. And so what we have here is that both Minister Sajjan and the Prime Minister knew about these allegations and still decided to extend General Vance's contract for another 3 years, gave him a $50,000 raise, and left him in charge of Operation Honor. And we know that he wasn't sincere about stomping out sexual misconduct in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Right. Let me move to your colleague. Let me move to your colleague, Ms. Mathyssen. What more do you think needs to be? Are there more questions that need to be answered here, Lindsay Mathyssen?
I think that there are, and I'm certainly awaiting to hear what happens at Defence Committee. I think what's clear. Ms. Vandenbeld said specifically that proper processes had been followed, except that I think that there were processes in place, but they aren't proper. And they certainly haven't provided the supports that these women who have come forward need. They haven't gotten to a point where women feel comfortable, safe, and can serve equally in the armed forces. And that's where we need to get to. I'm really happy that in our committee, we are getting to a point where we can put a report forward, where we can hopefully start to see some answers, some actions that the armed forces can bring forward.
But do you think? Do you think there are still, based on this latest testimony, do you think the Defense Committee needs to have more hearings?
I think so. I mean, their study was specifically to figure out what went wrong at the top,
right.
And this is one of the things that went wrong at the top to ensure that these women did not get justice.
So, Anita Vandenbeld, are Liberals prepared to extend the committee hearings to hear from Katie Telford and maybe others?
Our next study is actually on military justice. And you're going to Ms. Matthyssen's point, the process has failed in this case, and we need to look at that. One of the key ones is the military justice system, and the fact that we need to make it that women can feel that not only can they come forward, but they will see justice done.
Oh, okay. So are you prepared to have Katie Telford come before the Defense Committee and have another hearing, at least with her?
I believe that Mr. Marquez was very, very clear. I think that we know exactly what happened. We know that there was not enough information to continue at that time. We did exactly the same as what Mr. O'Toole
Okay, so
did.
that's a no.
About allegations.
So that's a no. Is that a no then? You think the hearings have done their work and you don't need to hear from anybody else? All right, Mr. Bezan, there's your answer. Liberals don't want this to proceed.
Of course they don't, because this is getting very close to the top. And when you got the second in command to the Prime Minister being his chief of staff in the loop and in the know, we know that she has to explain to the Prime Minister at some point in time about what the nature of these sexual misconduct allegations were, and must have also raised the issue that
did anybody? It's not clear anybody at the time knew what the nature of the allegations were. The complainant didn't want to proceed, didn't want her name known.
As Elder Marquez said, when he was told by Katie Telford to look into it, he assumed the worst. And we don't know what Zita Estravis said to Katie Telford, or if Katie Telford had a conversation with Mr. Sajan.
For the record, that was Mr. Sajan's chief of staff. Yeah.
Privy Council.
Okay, look, let me jump ahead a little bit. Lindsay Mathyssen, we now have the government talking about creating this this top-level job in the military to oversee racism, sexual misconduct, but it's going to be within the chain of command at the military. Is that going to work?
I don't think so. I mean, I would hope so. But from everything that we heard in terms of the testimony from Status of Women, you truly need someone who is independent. And all of these organizations, including CFNIS, the Provost Marshal, they consistently said, we are independent. But they are not. They are within that chain of command. And we were repeatedly seen from victim testimony that they haven't gotten the answers that they need. And on top of all of this, I mean, everything that's been said already, they've had so many meetings, so many things come forward, so many people come forward, and yet no one has taken responsibility. No one has taken responsibility for what has happened to women. So
just very quickly, Anita Vandenbeld, there's this creation of this new cultural czar that's going to look at the culture, but people are saying already if it's within the if it's within DND, it's not going to work.
Nobody has said that it's going to be within the chain of command. I just want to be very clear on that. We are listening to survivors. We just put $236 million in the budget for military sexual trauma and for survivors. And we are listening. We will make sure that this is something that will be independent, that it is something that is going to allow for real justice and just outcomes.
Just a few seconds left, Bezan. If it is within the chain of command, if it's within DND, can it work?
The only ones that are saying it can work within DND are Liberals. Everybody else said that it has to be independent of the chain of command. We support that independence. And at the end of the day, we need to see some ministerial accountability here. Minister Sajan hasn't even apologized yet. And we know that Prime Minister Trudeau knew what was happening, and he has to own up to that as well.
We're going to leave it there. Thank you all for your time tonight. I appreciate it. We'll have a chance to follow up another time. Thank you all.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.